Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here for this presentation. Today, we're going to be talking about burnout, and I'm your host. My name is Lisa Abar. I'm really happy to be here with you and to have this opportunity to have this discussion. I think it's really important to talk about mental health. It's important to talk about burnout because it's something that we're seeing more and more of. So thank you for your participation. Throughout the presentation, feel free to write questions in the chat and we'll be able to engage with you, answer any questions that you might have. And some of them also might be answered throughout the presentation. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. So for today's agenda, we'll be talking about work-related stress because stress is the main factor that contributes to burnout. We'll talk about what burnout really is, so the symptoms and the different phases. We'll talk about how you can prevent burnout, so provide some strategies that you might be able to use that could be really helpful for you. We'll talk about what you should do if you have symptoms yourself and or if your colleagues or your employees show signs of burnout. And then finally, we'll talk about resources that are available to help you through, this mental health challenge as well as other mental health challenges. So we'll talk about what's available through dialogue and what's available in other provinces across Canada as well in the public system, community sector, and that kind of thing. So as I said, my name is Lisa Abar. I'm a mental health specialist here at Dialogue since September of 2020. And in that role, I really try to support Canadian employees that are faced with various challenges related to their mental health. So it could be depression, anxiety, stress, and it could be related to their work life, to their personal life, so maybe relationships, or of course to the pandemic, so the confinement and isolation that we're all kind of living at the moment. So let's talk a little bit about work-related stress. So the first thing that we have to do is really define stress. So what is stress? So stress is a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. And I think it's pretty much safe to say that every person that is watching this webinar or that will watch this webinar will at one point feel stressed. And I think it's also important to realize that stress has a very bad connotation. So it's important to demystify stress and talk about what stress really is. So in addition to this strain or tension, what it is a physical, a biochemical reaction that happens in our body in response to a threat that we perceive we don't have the resources for. So it happens in 3 phases. The first phase of stress is really that alert phase. It's that fight or flight. So we have stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline that make our heartbeat faster, our muscles tighter, our breath faster as well, our blood pressure increases, and our senses just become sharper. And so all this is to protect us from a threat. And so this fight or flight is really essential to our survival. It's crucial for our well-being. The second phase of stress is really the resistance phase, sorry. And in that phase, our body is adapting to what we're living. And so we start to go into more problem-solving mode, more creativity. In this phase, if the stress is not reduced, if it's not addressed, the source of stress is not addressed, we start to become a little bit more frustrated, irritable, we might have a little bit more difficulty concentrating. And then if it continues to persist, it's not resolved, we fall into the third phase of stress, which is the chronic stress, which is the exhaustion phase. And so if it continues uninterrupted, our body's defenses is just not capable of continuing on. We're not capable to face this threat anymore. Our body's defense is just out of energy. We're out of fuel. And so at that point, we start to see things like burnout. We start to see things like depression, anxiety, and you can even see a weakened immune system. So it's important to understand the different phases of stress, especially when we're talking about burnout. So stress, whether it's a positive thing, so it's stimulating, or it's a negative thing, so it's paralyzing, it can appear in various situations. So a new situation, an unforeseen situation, a feeling of losing control, or a situation that is threatening and destabilizing for the individual. So we might think of losing a job, an exam, divorce, or it could be something positive, like the birth of our first child or something of that sort. So it's a new situation. We're confronted to something, new circumstances. So as I said, when we experience stress in inappropriate situations, or we experience prolonged stress, so really chronic stress, it's not interrupted, our body goes into phase 3. And so this can have harmful effects on our physical, psychological, and behavioral health. And one thing that's very important to realize is that each person will present with different symptoms. So not everybody feels their stress the same way, and it doesn't manifest the same way for everybody. So for some people, you might feel like your stomach is the first thing to be affected when you're stressed, your digestion. For some people, they might get headaches or migraines. So it's important to get to know yourself, to get to understand how your body reacts to stressful situations so that you can be more aware and take action with strategies, coping strategies, that kind of thing. So let's go over some of the stressors, the most common stressors in the workplace. So there's no doubt that number one on the list is work overload. So, given the recent pandemic, for most people, they've had to adapt their workload. They've had to adjust in some ways. A lot of people have more work. There's new demands that are created by the pandemic. So work overload is definitely something. We might ask ourselves, is 24 hours enough to get everything that we need done? You might also see that you have like a lack of decisional autonomy over your work. And so, when we're not able to exercise creativity, innovation, or control over our work and our projects, well, we start to become disengaged. We have more difficulty feeling fulfilled from those tasks. Another thing is the imbalance between the efforts that you're making and the recognition that you're receiving. So if you're really giving 150% of yourself every day and you feel like that's going unnoticed, or you're really taking on additional tasks or being really proactive in your approach and it's not being recognized, then that's definitely something that can come and touch on your well-being as well. Of course, poorly defined responsibilities and ambiguous roles, they introduce uncertainty. There's already a lot of uncertainty in the context of the pandemic, so we don't need more uncertainty. Knowing exactly what's expected of you and what you can expect of others is something that's really, really important. So working on clear communication, efficient communication, clearly defining the roles is something that's important. So insufficient communication can be a source of stress as well. So it's important in any organization to have messages that are going top down. So really setting goals, setting objectives, setting strategies, for it to be horizontal as well. So across different departments, really promoting collaboration, promoting teamwork. It's going to avoid mistakes. And of course, making sure that employees have an opportunity to provide their feedback, provide their suggestions, and be really involved in the different processes of the organization to feel like they're a part of it and that their work and their contribution matters. Another workplace stressor is, having a negative workplace climate. And so I think that can take on many different forms. Of course, a lack of recognition can be one of them, but it can also be, lacking core values, workplace gossip, discrimination, harassment, having a high turnover rate, so not being able to retain employees, having unfriendly competition between employees can definitely be another one. And when there's a lot of absences or lateness, that's something that can impact the team as well. The last stressor that we have on the list is in regards to equipment and resources. And so this can be a question of training, or it can actually be a question of the tools that we need to do our job. So making sure we have a computer that's working, or any other tools that we need for our project. Resources can also include support resources. So knowing who to go to when you need support, whether it's your manager or human resources or other organizations that are, at your disposal. So having those types of resources is very, very important. So obviously, these are just a few of the stressors that exist in the workplace. There are many, many others. And of course, there's stressors outside the workplace as well. So like family or relationship problems, different types of traumas that we might have lived through. And so all of that really combined, it's important to be aware of the different stress that we're under. So now that we've had a discussion about stress and we better understand the phases of stress and the role of stress in our lives, let's go ahead and talk about burnout. But before we do, we're going to look at the situation in Canada. So we're going to look at the prevalence of mental illness in Canada through a few statistics. So the first one is that 1 in 5 people are affected by mental illness every single year. So that's a really, really big number. And in terms of disability, psychological health problems and illnesses are the #1 cause of disability in Canada. And in terms of stress and what contributes to Canadian stress, 47% of working Canadians consider their work to be the most stressful part of their daily life. So that comes to show just how important workplace stressors can be in our everyday life. And then when we factor in the pandemic, we realize that there's additional stressors that are being added on top of that. So there's been research that's been done, and with the people that have been interviewed, 80% of Canadians indicated that the pandemic is having a negative impact on their mental health, and there's been a significant drop in the overall mental health of workers. And so that's huge. And that could be really a culmination of things. It could be financial stressors, relationship stressors. It could be, changes within the organization. So there's a lot of different things that can be contributing to that, of course. So what is burnout? So I think that the first thing that we'll do is do a little disclaimer. So, the next couple of slides are not meant to provide a diagnosis. It's really not the role. You want to avoid self-diagnosing because, as we'll see in a few slides, some of the symptoms that are characteristic of burnout are shared with other mental health illnesses like depression, for example. And it requires different treatments, a different approach. So what you want to do is really use this presentation as a means to understand burnout and identify the symptoms that are associated with it. And if you feel like you have any of those symptoms, to really seek out a doctor or another mental health professional to get an evaluation and to make sure that you're being treated for the right thing, and to also discard any other physical or mental health issues that you might be going through. So according to the World Health Organization, burnout is characterized by a feeling of intense fatigue, loss of control, and an inability to produce concrete results at work. So the term burnout was first used in 1969, and throughout the 1970s, it was really reserved for workers that were helping others. So we're in caregiving roles like doctors and nurses, teachers, social workers, those types of professions. But in recent years, although the definition of burnout has changed quite a bit, and there's not a 100% consensus, it's something that has been recognized across all professions, across all domains. It's something that doesn't discriminate based on gender or age. It can really affect just about anybody. So burnout is really a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. And so when somebody is burnt out, we'll see that they're really alienated from work-related activities. They're less involved, they're less engaged. You'll see a reduced performance, so they're not able to be as productive as they usually are at work and potentially in other spheres of their life. So especially now, in the context of COVID, where there's not a great separation between work and life, well, you're bringing that really home with you. You're already at home, so you're keeping that at home with you, and you're taking it into the other parts of your life, which could be really, really damaging. And one thing that I really want to stress about burnout is that it's not an individual problem. So I see this a lot with patients that I work with on the platform, and it's that, they think it's a character flaw. It's something that they did wrong, and they really are not happy with themselves because of it, and they have a lot of difficulty accepting the position that they're in because of it. And what I really want to drive home is the fact that it's not an individual problem or an individual character flaw. It's really burnout develops in the interaction between the individual and the structures that surround them. In this case, work. So that's one thing that I really want everybody to keep in mind. So you might be asking yourself, if burnout doesn't, discriminate based on age, based on gender, are there more people that are vulnerable to experiencing burnout? Are there risk factors? And the answer to that is yes, there are risk factors. There are people that will be more vulnerable to experiencing burnout. And so the first, indicator, or the first risk factor rather, is a lack of self-esteem. So doubting of your own capacities, having a negative, image or negative internal discourse regarding yourself and what you're able to do can definitely be something that contributes. Having difficulty setting limits is another big thing. And so limits and boundaries are to protect us. We all need to have limits and boundaries so that we can advise other people how they can and can't treat us, and also to identify how we can and can't treat ourselves. So it's a question of respecting yourself, respecting what you're comfortable with, to avoid resentment, feelings of guilt, frustration building. So it's really important when you talk about burnout to talk about limits. And do you have limits? Are you setting limits? Because limits are necessary. The next thing is having really high expectations of yourself. And so you have to ask yourself, are your expectations realistic? And you need to also reward yourself for the things that you are able to accomplish. So really making sure that you're taking note of that progress and you're celebrating those little wins. Another thing that can contribute is having major responsibilities outside of work. So, when I read that, I think of parents. I think of parents, especially in the context of the pandemic. You're really heroes because you're working 2 jobs full-time, even more than usual. For most parents, their kids are at home, or some of them might be, especially if they're younger. And so doing school at home while you're working, you're really putting on 2 hats and going between the 2 of them. So that can be a definite source of stress. It's something that takes an enormous amount of time and energy. Additionally, making work the center of your life can be something that increases your likelihood of experiencing burnout. It's important to have a healthy work-life balance, and I can't stress that enough. In the context of the pandemic, we already don't have a physical divide if we're working from home. And so it's really important to have strategies in place to enforce that psychological separation. So it could be going for a walk after work. It could be having a really great morning routine where you have time to recenter. And it could be having, a very relaxing nighttime routine where you have time to meditate or journal, to kind of go over whatever you're feeling and all the stress that you've been accumulating throughout the day. The next thing is demonstrating perfectionism in all aspects of your work, regardless of priorities. So it's very important, as we'll see in the time management portion, to prioritize. Not everything is a priority. Not everything requires 150% of your attention. And so it's important to be able to use your time and your energy wisely, and to celebrate those little wins, and to avoid having that negative internal discourse that will really just bring you down. And unfortunately, that is something that comes with a perfectionist, tendency sometimes. The next one on the list is having a high professional conscience. So, we all want to have to do the job, to have the job well done. We want to strive to have a great work ethic, but having a high professional conscience goes above that. And what we mean by that is you're trying to take responsibility for things that are really outside of your control. So for example, a client doesn't want to go with a project that you pitched. That's their choice, and we don't have control over that. And so it's important not to try to take responsibility over things that are not in our control. We can do what we can do. We can focus on our thoughts, our actions, but our attitude, our work ethic, but we can't control everything. The next thing is not knowing how to delegate or work as a team. And so I think it goes without saying that teamwork makes the dream work. We need teamwork to be efficient. We need teamwork to get things done. And so working as one team is so important. And delegating is a part of that. It's giving other people the opportunity to learn new skills, but it's also about using your time, once again, efficiently. So you're not just taking on everything on you and then being left with all these responsibilities and no time or energy to do them. For those with the personality type A, you might be more vulnerable to experiencing burnout as well. And so people with personality type A are very competitive. They're very self-critical. They really strive towards their goals, but without feeling that sense of joy or accomplishment in what they're able to do. There's a really intense level of involvement in work, and life is definitely revolving around work. And they constantly have this sense of urgency. Everything is urgent. They really try to book every minute of their time. They schedule their commitments way too tightly, and they try to multitask really to make the most out of every second. And so that can definitely be an ingredient for burnout, we'll say. And finally, having inadequate coping strategies, maladaptive coping strategies such as numbing yourself with drugs or alcohol, or doing really risky behaviors to help manage the stress, or really avoiding the situations, trying to escape as much as possible to avoid having to face the stress that you're going through. That can also make you more vulnerable to experiencing burnout. So what are the 4 phases of burnout? So I think it's important to realize that burnout develops insidiously and sets in over time. So it's not going to be from one day to the next that we burn out. It really is a process. It's a psychological process. It's not always a logical process. And it's really a process of depersonalization. People use the word depersonalization and dehumanization. They feel like they lose themselves for a short period of time in this process. But one thing that I want to note before I go into the 4 phases is that intervention is possible at any phase, but we want to do our best to catch it early, because ideally it'll take less time to recover. There will be less damage done. So I think it's important to pay attention to yourself, to pay attention to what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what your reactions are. And to have a little bit of time for introspection so you can see if you are in any of these stages. Another thing to mention is that denial is very much present in burnout. It's typical of burnout because we often think of burnout as a failure, as a personal flaw. And so I think it's at that point that it's really important to recognize that it's not. And I know I mentioned it before, that it's in that interaction with the structures, but it really is about that as well. So for the first phase of burnout, we're looking at physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion. So at this phase, you might still be keeping it together, but you finish work, you head into the kitchen, and you grab some ice cream or some junk food, some comfort food. You head back to the TV, you sit down and you watch Netflix for the rest of the night because you just don't have any more energy to take on anything else. And so normally you pride yourself on having like a really good work ethic and going the extra mile and getting things done. And now you're starting to look to cut corners, you're looking for shortcuts, that's starting to give you feelings of guilt. It's starting to eat at your self-confidence as well. And so you're developing brain strain as well in this phase. So you're having more difficulty concentrating. It's like a brain fog, more difficulty getting things done. So you're not used to this feeling, but your alarm bells might not be going off yet. In the second stage, in the second phase of burnout, at this point, you might be asked to take on more responsibility and you want to, but there's a little voice inside of you that's saying, who are you kidding? You can't do this. So you're not feeling very confident about yourself or about the future. You're not confident in your abilities, and you're also wondering if other people are recognizing this difference in you. You're wondering if your colleagues, your manager, your family is realizing that there's something wrong, despite the fact that you're projecting that everything is fine. But inside of you, there's that voice saying imposter, imposter. And so in this phase, there's a lot of shame and there's a lot of doubt, but you're not externalizing it yet. In the third phase, we see cynicism and callousness. And callousness basically means a disregard for others. So at this point, you're feeling a prolonged sense of insecurity and of vulnerability. And for some people, there's only one thing to do at that point, and that's to really defend themselves. And how do they defend themselves? They put on armor. They put on an attitude that keeps people at bay. So they become unpleasant so that people will avoid them. And in the short run, this will work. People will avoid them, and that will get them off their back for a little bit. But it's definitely a self-defeating strategy. It's something that becomes really burdensome for the person that's trying this strategy. It's hard to maintain that tough exterior all the time, and so at one point, if you continue in that way, it will crack. At which point we're gonna move into phase 4. But before we move into phase 4, I think it's important to touch a little bit on limits again, because in this phase, in phase 3, despite feeling completely overwhelmed, when you're asked to take on more, you're more than likely going to say yes. And a lot of the times it's because we think that being a team player means we have to make a sacrifice for the team. But in reality, being a team player doesn't mean you have to sacrifice your health, your well-being. It doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice your mental health or your physical health. There's options. So it's important to be able to vocalize your limits and say, I would love to take on this new project, but right now I have quite a few tasks attributed to me. So maybe we could take some time to kind of look over that and see where we might be able to attribute some of my other tasks to somebody else so I can take on this new project. So finding solutions, finding ways of putting down your limits and still taking on new projects. Because setting realistic limits is not a negative reflection on you or your work ethic. It doesn't mean you won't go the extra mile. It's on the contrary, you probably will go the extra mile, but you're going to do it at your own expense. And that's not good for your team, and it's not good for you in the long run. And so it's important to pay attention to this process. It's important to realize if you're in phase 3, because at this point, you might already there's risks associated, cardiovascular risks associated with phase 3, high blood pressure that's associated with phase 3 of burnout. And so you want to be careful at that point. If nothing's done, if there's no intervention, there's no new strategies that are applied, and the stress persists, that's where we get into phase 4. And so phase 4 is really characterized by failure, helplessness, and crisis. And so you might be caught in the familiar catch-22, which is damned if you do and damned if you don't. You're damned if you stay, you're damned if you go. Your coping structure is just not holding up. What you're trying to do is just not working out anymore. So burnout is really trying to race a marathon, but with no breaks, with no stops. And so nobody can run 26 miles without stopping at any point. So it's really important to realize that you need breaks, you need moments to check in with yourself, you need to take a breath from time to time. And it's not a negative reflection on you. It's every person at every point will have to go through that at some point of taking a break and taking a breath. And so one of the reasons that phase 4 is so debilitating, it's so disorienting, is because our psychological defenses really come down, they're worn down. We can't keep these things at bay anymore. So now a little thing, a misplaced comment, a little argument here or there, or a disagreement will feel very intense. You'll really feel that. You might even have older wounds kind of reopen, and you might find yourself really, really overwhelmed by all that emotion. Your regular coping strategies are just not working, and that's when it really gets into the crisis phase. So those are the 4 phases of burnout. And like I said, it's important to intervene at any stage. So even if you feel like you're in phase 4, you might need to see a doctor and get a leave of absence, depending on your situation, but it's important to intervene no matter what stage you're at. And so some of the changes that you might see with burnout, you might see with other mental health conditions as well, like anxiety and depression. So again, it's not a question of self-diagnosing. It's really a question of just paying attention to the changes, identifying them, recognizing that something's just not working, and addressing that with the right people. So with your manager, with a doctor, with a mental health professional. And so some of those changes at work might be absenteeism or frequent lateness, a drop in productivity, a lack of cooperation, crying. Some people really are not able to contain that emotion anymore, so it really just all comes out in tears. In terms of cognitive changes, we're looking at a loss of focus, memory issues, more difficulty making decisions, and frequent errors. In terms of physical changes, we might see fatigue, sleep disorders, unexplained weight loss or gain. And again, this is not because the person is dieting or starting a workout regimen. It's really because of overeating to compensate, or really having their appetite cut by just the stress, because that's how the stress manifests for them. You might see headaches or back pain, muscle aches, and heart palpitations. And in terms of psychological changes, there's a low mood that's characteristic of it, feeling really lost or overwhelmed, irritable or aggressive, low energy, really indifferent or detached, alienated again from work, and potentially having effects on your self-esteem as well. So I think at this point, it's important to just say, a brief word on depression. We won't go, very much into it. I would like for you to just take a moment to look over the symptoms so you can see what characterizes depression. But depression is a mental illness characterized by significant change in mood and can be accompanied by various physical and mental symptoms. So some of these symptoms that you're seeing here are similar to the ones that we just saw on the 2 previous slides. And so that's just to show you that there are certain things that can be in common. So that's why it's important not to self-diagnose. Because although burnout and depression share a number of symptoms, namely that feeling of exhaustion, so that fatigue, that low mood, and a decreased performance, there's other things that are different about them. So, depression also can be accompanied by suicidal ideation, among other things. And they're treated differently. So if you tell somebody that's burnt out to take a vacation or to go on a leave of absence, that might be enough to help them really manage the situation. But if you do the same with somebody that's in depression, that might not be what they need, and it might not help their situation at all. They might need to see a doctor for medication, or they might need to see a psychologist for therapy. So the treatment options are different for each mental health concern. And of course, some of the characteristics of burnout are very specific. So the symptoms, like the negative perception, the low mood, that all of that is associated to work. The stress is about work. The problems are associated with work. Whereas for depression, the negative thoughts and the perceptions and the feelings aren't only about work. They really extend to all areas of life. So it's important to make that distinction and to realize there are certain things that are really characteristic of burnout. So if what you're feeling is really associated with work, and it's more than just not liking your job or not feeling your job is right for you, then you might be going through a burnout, at which point it's time to reach out for some help. So I think that now that we have a good understanding of what burnout is, what the difference is with depression, the phases, the symptoms, I think it's important to talk about, how you can prevent it, to give you some tools, empower you to make a difference in your own life and to really take charge of your own health. So let's jump into that. So the first thing that I want to present is the circle of concern versus the circle of control. And so this is really a question of perception and having that perception guide our actions. So the circle of concern is things that we worry about, but that we don't have control over. So it's the black circle that you're seeing that includes things like economy, weather, news, other people's reactions or their social media feed, and of course, COVID-19. And then when we look at the circle of control, so that's the little white circle in the middle, that's the things that we can exercise control over. So of course, among those is our thoughts, our words, our behaviors, our choices, our mindset, our work ethic and values, our skills, and our coping strategies. So the thoughts, the actions, the activities that we have that help us face stressful situations. So what do we suggest? We suggest to really be proactive. We want to encourage you to be proactive people. And what do proactive people do? They have a small circle of concern. So they're not focused on all the things that they can't control. They're not focused on the weather and traffic and COVID. Of course, they're worried about it, but they're not going to put their time and energy into addressing issues that are not within their control. They're going to focus on their circle of control. They're going to focus on their thoughts, on their actions, on their mindset, all those things that they can influence, that they can control. Reactive people, on the other hand, have a large circle of concern, so they're worrying a lot about things that they can't control. They have a small circle of control, so they're not putting a lot of time and effort on their thoughts, actions, etc. So they waste a lot of time and energy reacting to issues that they have no control over, which will make them more likely to be stressed. And so in any situation, what you want to do is you want to ask yourself control questions. You want to say, what can I do in relation to this concern? What do I have control over that can impact or influence this concern? Or what can I control about what I say? Or what can I do to make it less difficult for me or others? How can I embrace this concern? And what can I do to simply let go of it and just accept and tolerate the situation for what it is? And so I think an interesting example of this, we can use Zoom fatigue. So for a lot of people that are working from home, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Zoom fatigue is the exhaustion that comes from being on back-to-back meetings all day through Zoom or any other similar program. And it's so exhausting because we're basically performing all day. We're hyper aware of ourselves and our looks and our background, how other people are perceiving us. A lot of the times we can see ourselves. And so this is not something that we usually have to deal with when we're in person. We're not worried that people can see every inch of us and that they can see us at all times and that what we say or how we say it, they can't really interpret our body language the same way. And so all these things make Zoom a very difficult task for us. So doing that all day is very exhausting in the long run. So you can focus on the fact that, COVID sucks. And, now we have to see our coworkers through a screen instead of seeing each other in person. Or you can say, listen, the situation is not ideal. I wish I could see my coworkers in person, but this is what I have right now. How can I make the most out of it? And so if you are going through Zoom fatigue, you want to take days where you're not booking any meetings, or have one day where you book meetings and the other days are free of meetings. You want to maybe try grounding techniques or anchoring techniques before you start a meeting to help you stay in the here and now and deal with some of the emotion that comes up. So it could be something as simple as moisturizing your hands, because that connects you with your sensations, with what you're feeling with your hands, which brings you back into the present moment. So it's different little things like that. It's also a question of how can you make your meetings more engaging? So maybe it's a question of making smaller meetings so you have more discussion, or sending videos to update on projects instead of having a live meeting, or starting every meeting with a question or an interesting comment or an interesting reflection, things like that to really change it up. And so in this case, when the second way we're looking at Zoom fatigue, we feel like we have a lot more control. There's a lot more options that are available to us. So that's what I'm challenging you to do. I'm challenging you to see it in a different way, to try to change your perception, to try to challenge the perception and regain control of the situation. In addition to that, of course, since we talked so much about stress, we want to talk about stress management. We want to talk about effective strategies for stress management. So the first one, obviously, is making times for friends and family. Friends and family are an invaluable resource. We need them. They make us feel good. So again, we don't have access to them maybe the way that we want to, but it's about finding alternative ways of staying connected. So it could be a Netflix, a movie night, it could be a trivia night, but finding ways to really just stay connected with our social network so that if we need them, they're there to really pick us up, and vice versa. Another effective strategy is meditation. So mindfulness meditation, for example, can be a great option. And so, not to go too much into detail, but, a lot of people think that mindfulness meditation means having no thoughts, but that's not something that anybody can do. We have over 60,000 thoughts a day, so there's no moment where your mind is completely blank. What you want to do is just be able to look at your emotions, take a few seconds to figure out how you're feeling. You can concentrate on your breath, you can concentrate on your body, and just be aware of your emotions, be aware of your sensations, without judgment. That's pretty much what it is. And it just helps ground you. It helps you become more in tune with your body and strengthen that body-mind connection. And it can help a lot for focus, as well as for stress and a slew of other really amazing benefits. Another thing you can do is visualization exercises, namely visualizing success. So if there's a process you're scared of doing, or you're worried about, or you're stressed about, then one thing that you can do is try to visualize that process, you going step by step, and completing those steps really successfully, and completing the process really successfully. And there's been research that shows that just doing that is as effective as actually doing the action, doing the process in real life. So I think that that's really powerful, and it helps boost our confidence in our capacities. Another thing that we recommend is avoiding stimulants like coffee and Red Bull and any type of energy drink, and trying healthier alternatives. So I know for the coffee lovers, you're going to say impossible, but what I recommend is if you can get rid of the coffee, then at least replace maybe the coffee that you have later in the day. If you have one in the afternoon, try a healthier alternative, try a chamomile tea, something to help relax your body. The next thing is physical exercise. There's no doubt. I think everybody knows how good physical exercise is for your physical body, but it's also amazing for your mental health. It really, the idea of getting a runner's high and being able to take anything on and feeling really capable. I think that that's an amazing feeling. So, physical exercise is so important for us. It's important for sleep. It's important for mood. So it's definitely something worth incorporating, and it's a healthy way of evacuating some of the frustrations and emotions that we have built up. And lastly, reading. Reading really helps occupy our mind. Reading something that helps us relax, or that's really interesting, stimulates our creativity, it stimulates our imagination, and it helps our body just relax and unwind. So it's something that could be great to integrate in nighttime routine. Next on the list is time management strategies. So the first thing that we want to do is be priority focused. So you want to figure out what really needs to be done. You don't want to let things get to being a high level emergency before you start tackling them. So being really priority focused is important. Another thing that you can do is do the most difficult task first. So a lot of people have the tendency to do it last, which will build more stress. But what you want to do is get it out of the way right off the bat, so that you're starting the day off really productive, and you're giving yourself that boost of confidence that you might need, and you get that difficult task out of the way. Another thing is implementing a daily productivity hour. So if you feel like it's impossible to get your work done because you're just constantly your attention is being pulled in every direction. So have a moment, an hour, 2 hours, however many hours you need per day, where you're just not available to other people. You're not answering your emails. You're not answering your phone. So you're really taking control of technology, so it doesn't control you, and you're using the mutes, and you're deactivating your notifications when you need to, so that you're able to focus on what you need to get done, so that you don't need to work, let's say, overtime or in the evenings or on the weekends. You want to delegate whenever it's appropriate. So, select the right person, give all the information that they need to be able to do that task, and then following up on it, make sure you give feedback, helping out if there's problems. But it's just a better use of your time and energy. Having a to-do list is another really important thing. So I say a to-do list system. So instead of having, let's say, 100 post-it notes all over your desk, all over your computer, you want to have one list that you're just constantly updating, you're constantly reprioritizing so that it's reflecting what you really need to get done. And what I recommend is actually updating it at the end of the day. So in the last 15 minutes of your day, you'll figure out, check off what you got done, which is such a satisfying feeling. And then, the next day, you'll also know exactly what you're focusing on. So that's really powerful as well. And you want to avoid perfectionism because it is a huge amount of your time and energy that will go into every single thing. And so over time, that can definitely build up a lot of exhaustion and fatigue. So you want to avoid your perfectionist tendencies. You want to give 110% to what needs 110%. And if something takes 80%, it takes 80%. So knowing where to put your time and your energy is a very, very important skill to develop. So finally, what should you do if you have these symptoms? So the first thing, and we talked about some of these things already, but is really acting at the first sign. So not letting the situation really degenerate before you take action. You want to pay attention to your feelings. You want to become in tune with your feelings, your emotions, your reactions. You want to give yourself permission to express them, either to someone you trust or in another activity like writing or physical activity. If you need the help, you want to agree to get help. So it might be from somebody that you trust, it might be from a professional, but the thing to realize is that you're not alone in experiencing difficulties, especially not right now. And it doesn't make you a weak person. It actually takes an immense amount of courage to reach out and ask for help. And there will be somebody on the other line that's there to listen. And so I think that that's really important, a very important for me to message for me to pass on today. You want to set your limits. So don't be afraid to say no. It's hard to say no at first, but with time, it becomes easier. You want to delegate, share the responsibility. You want to accept help in completing tasks, whether it's at home or at work. So involve your kids, involve your spouse in what you're feeling or your partner in what you're feeling so that they can help you during this difficult time. You don't want to isolate yourself from the people that you love or from the activities that you enjoy. You want to continue seeing those people, even if it's just virtually, and enjoying those activities or finding new activities. It could be a good opportunity to explore something new to help you manage your stress. So if you love to play an instrument, play that instrument. If you love to color or draw, then it's very important that you do that on a regular basis. And if you're not sure what you like, that's okay too. It's a time to experiment with different things. Maybe you want to try painting, maybe you want to try poetry. Really, the options there's lots of options. And so it's just a question of trial and error to find what works for you. You want to maintain good lifestyle habits, including good work-life balance. So you want to make sure that you get enough sleep, that you're having a balanced diet, that you're taking time out of your day to eat, that you're getting physical exercise in there, you're getting outdoors, that kind of thing. So just really making sure that you have habits that are promoting your well-being. And treating yourself to the little pleasures in life. So that might be a glass of wine, it might be a little bar of chocolate, but just little things that really come and bring you pleasure, obviously in moderation. And you want to remember the strategies that you've used in the past that helped you get through a difficult time and build on your personal strengths. So for example, if you really used journaling a lot in the past to make sense of what you were living and bring an order to things, then that's something that you should redo. If creating a routine and having a really stable routine is something that helped you, then let's recreate that routine. If your symptoms come from a specific situation, then address that situation. So let's say it's a conflict with one of your coworkers. Don't wait for the situation to degenerate. You really want to address it either with that person, with your supervisor, with human resources, with whoever is responsible so that you can address it, because you might find that once that situation is addressed, then your symptoms start to disappear. So use the resources that are at your disposal. You know, speak to your manager, speak to your human resources, reach out to your EAP provider, reach out to Dialogue or to any of the other resources that I'll be mentioning later on to get some professional help. And so what should you do if your colleagues or your employees show signs of burnout? So in terms of addressing the situation with colleagues, you want to watch out for the same signs and the same symptoms. You want to ask, you know, how are you? I think that's very important because some people won't be comfortable initiating the conversation, but if they're asked, you know, they'll use that opportunity to open up and really, it might be the first time. And so you want to show a lot of empathy and do it without judgment so that the other person doesn't close back up and so that they'll take the support that you're offering and they'll go to the resources that you'll refer them to. And it's important to respect your own limits. So it's not your role to become a therapist at this point and to play the role of a therapist, which can be really exhausting when you're already overwhelmed. So you just want to refer them to the resources that they have at their disposal to help them through this moment. For managers, if you're looking to address a situation with an employee, there's a few preparatory steps that I recommend. So the first thing is you want to identify the problem with observable facts. So what concretely have you seen change? Is it a change in their productivity, in their, their attendance? What's changed? And have a little list of those. You want to schedule the meeting at a time where you're mentally, emotionally, available to have that conversation, and you want to make sure you have enough time, and you want to anticipate the employee's possible reaction. So maybe they'll be very hesitant or say, no, everything is fine. But in reality, if you sense a little bit of hesitation, you can say, I sense a little bit of hesitation on your part, and I just want to make sure that there's nothing that I can do to help. So once you're actually intervening, you want to share your concerns, you want to present the problems and the facts that you observed, and you want to give them the opportunity really to speak. You want to, use active listening. So ask questions just to better understand the issue and their needs. So reiterate what they're saying to make sure that you understood well. Be really authentic and genuine, and of course, make sure that they know it's confidential, it's not going anywhere outside of that conversation. Discuss the possible support mechanisms that are available to them, and end the meeting with, a personalized plan. So these are our objectives, and this is, we're going to follow up in X amount of time, and you make sure they know that they can always come to you if they need additional support. And if the person needs to go, let's say, on a leave of absence, then it's important to plan for that, and make sure that whatever, files need to be taken care of is done before, because once they're on that leave, you want to make sure that you don't disturb them. So you'll tell the team that the person won't be there for X amount of time for personal reasons. And once they're on leave, if you do contact them, it's really just to see if you or the organization can do anything to help in their recovery, but again, without putting any type of pressure for them to return. And then once they do return, if they return, it's a question of a progressive return, making sure that, the stress that they're going to be faced with is going to be manageable for them, that they have the resources and strategies in place to be able to manage it, that they have the support that they need, and making sure that you also recognize the fact that they came back, because coming back can be really scary after a burnout. You're just finding yourself again, you're just finding your footing, and you don't want to fall back into that same feeling. And so that could be really challenging. So just keeping that in mind as well is important. So in terms of resources, I think it's good to just touch briefly on what's available at Dialogue. So we do have doctors and nurses for physical and mental health issues like anxiety, depression, among other things. We have mental health specialists like myself. We do coaching. And so the number of sessions is determined by us depending on the needs. And we have psychologists and psychotherapists as well as mental health therapists for therapy. So if we feel that you're the right candidate for that, we feel that you can benefit from that type of service, then we will refer you on. And we have quality and customer experience managers. So all these things are covered with our stress management and well-being program. And we have other professionals that are available with a fee, so occupational therapists and nutritionists. And through our EAP program, we have even more. So we have manager coaching. So if you're facing a difficult situation with an employee, you can come onto the platform and consult, and one of our mental health specialists will help you and provide you with some resources that could be helpful. There's family and relationship coaching. So if you're trying to address something in your couple, or you're having, let's say, difficulty parenting your child, or you're going through a divorce and you want to work on co-parenting. So this could be a really good opportunity for coaching. And again, the number of sessions, depending on the program, and is determined by the professional. There's also lawyers. So you have one session of 2 hours. There's a career counselor, so 2.5 hours, and financial planner, 2 hours as well. In terms of resources, other resources that are outside of Dialogue but available in Quebec, we list some of them here. So I'll give you a moment to just kind of look through them, but there's talk lines and helplines. There's suicidal crisis, resources as well, like Suicide Action Montréal. Of course, there's the professional orders, and there's affordable therapy that's available in Quebec as well from different organizations. Some of them are community organizations, some of them are university psychology clinics. And so this is not meant to be exhaustive. We at Dialogue can really help you navigate and find the appropriate resources for you, for your situation, for your needs in your area. But we just thought it would be important to include some of them. In terms of medical resources and other resources, you have, of course, the CLSC in hospitals. You have Info Santé and Info Social at 811. There's many, many other ones. So I'll just give you a moment to kind of look through them. And in terms of the rest of Canada, so outside of Quebec, there's a lot of pan-Canadian resources like Crisis Services Canada, which is for mental health crisis and suicidal crisis. You have Canadian Mental Health Association, so they have a great program called Bounce Back, which is a free guided self-help program that's good for those experiencing mild to moderate anxiety or depression. So you can always go on their website to see if you qualify, if you're eligible, and how to go about it. You can always call us as well to get more information. There's also Kids Help Phone, Teens Help Phone, and 211 to find out what services are available in your community. 811, I think, is the provincial health information line across Canada in every province. And then for Indigenous peoples, there's also Hope for Wellness Helpline and Talk for Healing. And so these are counselors that are really culturally aware, and there's even services that are available in different languages. So it's a question of seeing if the language that you're looking for is available, but it could be a great resource as well. And then you also have in Alberta, addiction helplines, mental health helplines, the same thing in British Columbia, New Brunswick, Manitoba, and Ontario. So there's a lot of helplines, and they're there to listen, but they're also there to provide information and resources. So I think that those can be really, really useful as well. So I want to thank everybody so much for attending. I hope that we were able to provide some information that's really interesting and relevant about burnout, and for you to leave here with some tools as well that you can use to face the stress of your workplace and your everyday life. And if you have any questions or comments, you feel free to write them in the chat. And if you have questions regarding your Dialogue access, please contact us at support@dialogue.co, and it would be our pleasure to speak with you. So thank you very much once again.